There's a technique you will need to use for this upcoming lab. It's a simple technique. It's very useful, very powerful when you're troubleshooting your programs. It's called forces. You can force things on and off. For example, you can force an input on or off, or you can force an output on or off. You can force memory addresses on or off. And it's done through the programming software. This is a feature that all PLC programming softwares that I know of include, because it's such a useful technique. I've written a small program here. It's relative to what you're going to do in the lab. It's somewhat related. It's obviously not complete. I'm not going to give you the solution. But in the lab, you're supposed to decide on a set of friends that will allow your party to go forward. And in testing it, since you don't have actual switches connected to the PLC yet, it's a good idea to be able to force things on and off. So, for example, I've got Mary here represented by either she is or is not going to be invited to the party, and John as well. Either he will or will not be. And I've got a condition at the end. Basically, if Mary is invited and John is invited, then this particular condition comes on, this output comes on at the end. Now, obviously, the actual lab will take a little more thought than this. But let's connect to the PLC and see how to test this, because it looks like that the rule that I'm using here is that if one is invited, then the other one also has to be invited. So now that we're connected to the PLC, it looks like the rule I'm implementing here is that if Mary is invited and John is invited, then the condition is met. Now, how would I test that? Because these particular addresses are physical input addresses on the PLC. Well, I can force them on. So if I go to Monitor and then Override View, this is where you get to force things on or off. Now, you have to select what it is that you want to force on or off. So let me click in this address field. That brings up these three dots. I don't know why they're not just there by default. But I am going to choose, let's see, we're dealing with Mary and John, so I'm going to choose Mary as one of them, and I can force that particular memory address, that input, on or off. So if I click, I want it on, override, you got to double click on the override button. I can either double click here to write it, or I just usually hit write all new values. It'll say, warning, I can't write them all at once. What it means is if you've got multiple forces you're asking it to write, it doesn't literally write all of them at the exact same time. But that's okay. So now you notice that Mary is on. Even though the physical PLC has no input switch attached to that particular input, I have forced it on in memory. Now, that's not enough to make the output come on, but I have forced that particular input on. And I'd like to see the output come on, so why don't I just add another memory address. Let's reference John, he's the other one. And we'll force that particular bit on as if I'm inviting him to the party as well. And now notice, even though I've double-clicked that override, I haven't written the value yet. So I'll say write all new values, yes, write it out. And there you see now that I've forced both input 1 and input 3 on. Since both are on, that's an AND condition, so power passes through and turns on the output, which is C26. There's another way I can force that output to come on. I'm going to clear these. Now if I just right click and delete the row, it won't shut them off. So what I'm going to do is uncheck or turn off the override bit. And then I'm going to go ahead and just delete these rows because I don't want to force them anymore. And I'm going to put a different address in for the first one. In fact, I'm going to force an output on. Now, in this case, it's just a memory address, but you could use Y addresses just as well. So I'm going to force memory address C, let's see, where did I put it? C26. I jumped down here when I was working with it, so there we go. And I'm going to make it turn on, even though the rung preceding it doesn't calculate that it should be on, because the two inputs are not on. When I force it on by double-clicking override, write all new values, you'll notice that that output, well, I expected that output to come on, but it didn't. So let's see if I can figure out why it's not coming on. So I'm trying to force that memory address on. Maybe I've got the wrong address. This says C26, nickname is C4. That does match. Let's see, we're in run mode, we're overriding. Maybe it's a little confused for some reason. Let me try again. I'll go to Monitor, Override View. C4 is on, so I'll hit new value on, write new values. Yes, do it. That still didn't take care of it. Let's try this. Let's force both inputs on, so John and Mary, and then we'll try to force that bit off and see what happens. So we'll say on, override, and then we'll uncheck the override for C26. Write all values, yes. So those two come on. That turns on that output. Now, can I turn it off? Can I turn that output off? So let's say off, override, write all new values. Yes, so I can force it off. For some reason, it's not letting me force it on. So why is that? So now it's on. What if I turn off John? Well, it's not letting me force this particular memory address on. The software used to be set up where you could force particular memory addresses on, and I don't know why it's not letting me do that now. Let's try some actual outputs and just see if that makes any difference. So let's change this to, say, Y001, and it doesn't really matter what's referencing, it's just a memory address right now. So we'll write that into the PLC. Okay, change to stop, download the program to the PLC, it's done, put it back in run mode. And so now if we go to our override view, let's see, looks like we've got some values. Oh, no, we don't. We closed it. Okay. So now if I choose, that's right, I downloaded a program so it wouldn't have any overrides. Okay, so John and Mary. So I can force those on or off. And let's try including now Y001, because that's the output address. Maybe it has something to do with the fact that the C's are memory addresses. So I'm going to turn on override for both of this. John and Mary show that when I write all new values, there we go, the output comes on. Alright, that's expected, but what if I try to force the output off? So override that. That works. So what if I force, or I just, well, let's go ahead and force, I guess, John off, for example. And of course I don't need to force the output off, it will turn off naturally because John is off. But now let's turn the output on, write all new values. And so it does not force the output on like I would expect. So it can force the output off, but it can't force those outputs on. I believe that's probably a bug in this version of the software. You should be able to force outputs on as well as any memory address. It shouldn't really matter. So why they did that, I don't know, but it's a lacking feature that older versions have. I run a PLC at my home for my heating system, and I use the Click Koyo PLC, and I know I can force outputs on because I have a memory bit, a C address, that controls whether or not my heat pump can turn on, and I can force that memory address on.